Thank you so much for joining us today for our presentation on the E-2 visa. My name is Dustin Saldarriaga. I'm an associate at Scott Legal PC. If you're here today, you might already have some familiarity with the E-2 visa, or this might be your introduction to the visa. All of you are in the right place. Our firm was actually founded on an E-2 visa about 10 years ago, and the E-2 visa continues to be an important part of our practice. Our firm has a focus on investor visas, and we have processed hundreds of them. Today, we'll be discussing risky E-2 visa applications and how to navigate them, including when an investment amount is low. A few things before we get started. This webinar is part of a series. We'll continue the series by doing at least 2 webinars a month, and we do those on a variety of immigration topics. We already have a number of webinars scheduled, and we regularly add more. We also will be sending at the end of this presentation the PowerPoint that you see on your screen. We'll also send a link where you can sign up for the additional webinars that I mentioned before. And finally, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll send a link to the recording after the presentation. A few housekeeping items before we get started. We do plan to reserve a few minutes at the end of the presentation for questions. If the question you ask is particularly relevant to where we are in the presentation, we might take it during the presentation, but otherwise we'll save time at the end to get to all the questions. If you have a question, you have 2 options to send it to us. You can either use the question and answer function on Zoom, or you can use the chat function. I'll be monitoring both, and so please feel free to use whichever is most convenient for you. We also have we do cover a number of topics during the presentation. Again, I might be saving them till the end, but we do plan to get to all of them. All right, my name is Dustin again, and I will be the moderator for this webinar. We are very fortunate to have my colleague Kelly Legrand-Wiener here today to speak with us. Kelly is the firm's managing attorney. She has a wealth of experience, not just regarding investor and entrepreneur visas, but also family-based visas, and really the full range of visa options. Kelly will be kicking us off by talking about the E-2 visa requirements. So with that, Kelly, I will pass it off to you.
Thank you, Dustin. Good morning, everyone. So as Dustin mentioned, today we will be talking about the E-2 visa, specifically options where the investment amount is low or risky cases. And we'll get started with the E-2 visa requirements. So the first requirement for the E-2 visa is that you must be a national of a treaty country to qualify for this visa. You also, if you want to be an E-2 investor as opposed to an E-2 employee, you have to own at least 50% of the E-2 company to come to the U.S. Additionally, you must make a substantial investment. So as an investor visa, the investment is a key part of the application. So there's a few different parts to this requirement. So one is that your funds must be at risk and irrevocably committed. What that means is that you actually need to spend some money. You cannot just put money in a business bank account and say, okay, I've invested the money. If you're starting up a business, then you need to actually make the expenditures that are necessary to get that business up and running. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. If you're purchasing a business, then you need to spend the full purchase price to either purchase the entire business or to purchase a majority share of that business. So the money actually has to be transferred either to the seller or into escrow, which we'll talk a bit more about later. Another part of the investment requirement is that the source of funds needs to be explained, and the money must come from a legitimate source. So this is the government kind of making sure that the money is not coming from, any illegal dealings, anywhere that's, not legitimate. So the money can come from your personal savings. It can be a gift. It can come from a sale of personal property. It can be a personal loan. With the loan, it cannot be secured by the assets of the E-2 business. Sometimes this comes up if you're purchasing a business and there's some discussions about seller financing. So generally that's not going to be permitted because seller financing usually contemplates that, the loan is secured by the assets of the business you're purchasing. And so that's actually specifically not permitted for the E-2. The reason being that they want the investor's personal assets to be at risk. So let's say that you have a property that you own, a home perhaps, and you take out a home equity line of credit. That would be fine in terms of your source of funds for the E-2. If you do actually do a gift, many people do this. They have a gift from a family member or friend, something like that. That's fine, but you also need to show where that person received the gift money from. So a gift letter on its own wouldn't be enough. You would also need to show either the person's tax returns, or if it was from the sale of property, you need to show the sale of property and you receiving the money. So those are just good things to keep in mind when you're thinking about how to structure your investment. Another requirement for the E-2 is that the investment must be substantial. And we'll talk about this a little bit later in the presentation on a particular slide. But generally, the thing to keep in mind is that what is substantial is not a set dollar amount. The government doesn't provide us with any figure that says this amount is substantial. Certain consulates around the world may have their own ideas about what qualifies. And there's certain consulates where lower investment amounts, like the ones we're going to talk about today, are just, not possible, or very, very risky because the consular officers are not used to seeing low investment amounts and don't like them. There's, other consulates that are more friendly to those types of cases. So we'll talk about that a bit as well. But substantial is really going to mean kind of, have you spent the total cost to get your business up and running? So for service-based businesses, this may be kind of a lower amount. We have many clients who are applying with investment amounts of, $100,000 or lower, which are really extremely low investments. I'd say anything, above, under 200,000 is kind of considered low. And then anything, under 100,000 is going to be considered very, very low. It looks like we lost our.
I'm going to put it back up right now.
No
Here we go. Just 1 second.
So, those are the, I'd say that the nice thing is that when you're doing a service-based business, you do have the ability to argue that you've spent everything necessary to get the business up and running when you've spent a lower amount. So that's just something to keep in mind is, that's kind of the baseline for substantial is, can you really prove that you've spent the full startup cost for this type of business? And usually that means you want to kind of submit some documents to the government to help support your argument that you have spent everything necessary. Perhaps an article from a magazine, a respected business magazine, an industry report that shows, hey, these are the types of startup costs you're this type of business, and then show that you've spent, in excess of that, or at least that amount. So when we're talking about things you can spend money on when you're starting up a new company on an E-2, some good expenditures are, inventory, equipment, website, office supplies. If you have commercial office space that you need, any marketing expenses, any business, professional fees you spend to set up your business. We'll go over another, a list later in the presentation as well. Legal fees can also be included. You really want to think about what is it that you can include to show that the business, things that you really spent to get the business up and running. Certain things cannot be included. So things like travel, flights, any food expenses, things like that, are generally not strong expenses. And some consulates dislike them so much, they actually put on their website, do not submit flight receipts, do not submit travel expenses. So those are the types of things we like to keep out because they actually are, they're detrimental to your case. If an officer sees them, they may start to look into your investment schedule more closely and not like, because they don't like to see those types of travel expenses. So another thing to consider in part of the investment requirement is that, you can invest either by starting a business or by purchasing a business. When you're starting a business, you can kind of, you have a little bit more flexibility to define the startup costs. Here's what, you can argue, here's what it costs to start up a marketing consultancy. And then you may submit articles to support that. When you're purchasing a business, generally if it's a, an arm's length transaction where you don't know the seller personally, they're not a family member, kind of whatever the fair market value of the business is, whatever they're advertising it for on the open market is usually going to be considered substantial because that is what they're, what they're selling it for. And then you would have the option either to transfer the money directly to the seller, or you have the option to put the money into escrow. That's a nice benefit that you get when purchasing a business, that you can put the money into escrow with the sole condition that the release of the funds is based on the approval of the E-2. And that's a way to hedge your risk, so that if for some reason the application is not approved, then the money would go back to you. So you don't really have that option when you're starting up a new business, but when you're purchasing a new business, or when you're purchasing an existing business, you have a bit more ability to hedge your risk there. So another requirement for the E-2 is that the business cannot be marginal. And this means the business has to support more than just the investor and their family. And what that translates to is jobs, that the E-2 investor needs to plan to, to hire US workers for the business. It really can't be a consultancy where you say, well, I don't really need employees, I'm just going to be a solo consultant. They really don't like that. Well, it doesn't qualify for the E-2. So generally, that's one of the reasons why they look at consulting businesses, with more scrutiny, because there is some concern that that's what consultants will do. So something to keep in mind, that when you're looking at the E-2, it really needs to be, you need to be willing to kind of build out the operation and hire employees in the United States to kind of continue to qualify for the visa and to qualify in the first instance. Another requirement is that the business must be real and operating. So if the business is a company that you're buying that's already up and running, then you would submit things like tax returns, W-2s, sales contracts, website reviews of the business or its services, kind of anything that shows the business is already operating. If you're starting up a new business, then the business, obviously you're not going to have those types of documents, and that's fine. Things that you can include are signed commercial leases, proof you've established your business entity, so usually an LLC or a corporation, proof that you've set up a website to, that you've advertised your services. If you have contracts with prospective clients, if you have letters of intent with prospective clients, those are also very good. If your business is the type that needs licenses, you should have acquired those. So all of those are the types of things that you can use to show the government that the company is, will be able to start operating imminently once you get the E-2 visa approval. Another requirement is that you have to be coming to solely develop and direct the E-2 enterprise. And what that means is that you should be coming to really run the company on a high level. So going back to what we were talking about with the consultant, they don't want someone who's going to come in and just essentially do the day-to-day consulting work. They want somebody that's going to come in and run a company that will hire consultants to do that work. It doesn't mean that you as the E-2 investor cannot also engage in some of those activities, but they should really be ancillary to your more executive type role in overseeing the development of the E-2 company. And finally, the E-2 visa is a non-immigrant visa that does not have, full dual intent, which means that you need to show that you intend to return to your home country when the visa expires. The standard for this is usually quite low, somewhat different than a visa like a B visa or an F visa, where you really need to show, that you have a residence abroad that you don't intend to abandon. For the E-2 visa, for most applicants, they're going to be able to submit just a signed statement explaining that they intend to depart, when the E-2 visa, ends. The E-2 visa can be renewed indefinitely. You are permitted to actually move your residence to the United States, so that it's a bit of a lower standard. That being said, if you do have red flags, like you do have, lots of US citizen relatives, or you do have kind of outstanding immigrant petitions, it's something you want to talk about with your attorney, just in terms of what additional documents could you provide to help satisfy them that you really do have that non-immigrant intent. We can go, perfect. So let's talk a little bit more about the E-2 visa requirements, who can apply and how long the visa lasts for. So nationals of treaty countries can apply for the E-2 visa. There's a list that you can find, on our website or online that lists all the countries. There's many European countries, for example, the UK, France, Spain, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands. There's also countries like Australia, Canada, Chile, Colombia, New Zealand, and Israel were also added in recent years. So there's a long list, and many countries do qualify. Unfortunately, India and China do not qualify. So that's kind of two areas where, two countries where there's lots of people that are immigrating to the US, but unfortunately cannot take advantage of the E-2 visa. Something to note, however, is that to qualify for the E-2 visa, you just need to have a passport for that country. So you don't need to have been born in that country to qualify. If you were born, let's say, in India, and then perhaps you moved to Canada and you became a citizen of Canada, you can now apply for the E-2 visa with that Canadian passport. So that's another good thing to keep in mind. When you're applying for the E-2 visa, as we discussed briefly earlier, you have two options. One is you're purchasing an existing business. Another is that you're starting a business in the United States. For people who, want perhaps a bit less risk, or would feel more comfortable with a company that's already established, purchasing the existing business can offer that to you. Some of our clients work with business brokers to find kind of these businesses that are appropriate for the E-2. It's always a good idea to look for a business that's kind of aligned with your skill set and your history to show that you can successfully develop and direct the business. But you can, if you have kind of general managerial or executive or entrepreneurial skills in your background, many of our clients also will kind of switch what they were previously doing to purchase a new type of business. Another advantage of purchasing an existing business is that if the business is already doing well, then you have that established background, to fall back on. And then as well, you can take advantage of an escrow arrangement where you can, execute the purchase sale agreement, transfer the money to escrow, and then the only condition for release of those funds can be approval of the E-2 visa. That being said, I would say the vast majority of our clients are people starting up new businesses in the United States. So that is very possible to do. And if you have a solid 5-year business plan, showing you're going to hire US workers, showing it's a viable business idea, it certainly is also extremely, a viable option to start a business in the US. You just do have to be comfortable that you'll need to be putting that money at risk, committing that money by actually spending it on your startup expenses. One other thing with the E-2 visa is, how long is your visa valid for? And this is going to depend on something called the reciprocity schedule. So the reciprocity schedule tells us, other countries around the world have their own similar types of visas, and, they may only provide US citizens 2 years, with that similar type of work visa. So then the US will often kind of change the parameters for various countries based on what they offer to US citizens. So that means that for many countries, you can get up to a 5-year visa. For example, the UK, Canada, Spain, you can get a 5-year E-2 visa. But there's also some countries where you can get less. France, you used to be able to get a 5-year E-2 visa, but the reciprocity schedule changed. And I believe now it's 25 months. So that's, unfortunately, that did change. There's also some places where you can only get an E-2 visa stamp for 3 months. For example, Bangladesh. For those people, they are able to enter the US on their E-2 visa, and they get 2 years in E-2 status. That applies to everyone. If you have a 5-year visa, every time you enter, you can get 2 years on E-2 status. If you have a 3-month visa, when you enter, you can get 2 years on E-2 status. So that's something to keep in mind, that when you enter, you always want to check your status. The way you check that is by going online and looking up the I-94 website and making sure that you have those 2 years in E-2 status when you enter. All right. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about, how much investment is enough, and what does it mean to invest a substantial amount of money, particularly in this type of webinar where we're talking about, low investment amounts, which can make for more risky cases. So there is no set minimum amount. There is no dollar figure that the government specifically says they want to see. The amount must be substantial in light of the type of business that you're starting. So they're going to look at the total cost to set up a certain type of business to determine what amount is substantial, and apply something called the proportionality test, where they weigh the total amount that you have invested versus the total cost of starting the business. So for a service-based business, or any of kind of the low investment amounts we've been talking about, under 200,000, particularly low, under 100,000, you want to be able to say that you've spent 100% of the cost to set up the business. At the extreme end of the proportionality test, let's say that you're starting up an enterprise where there's startup costs of $100 million, but you're investing $10 million. So even though percentage-wise, that's a much lower percentage, because the magnitude of the investment is so large, that might still qualify. But in the types of cases that we're talking about today, so anything really under the 200,000, you want to be able to argue you spent 100% of the costs, to get that business up and running. So for example, we have many clients that are starting up service-based businesses, consulting firms, even law firms, those are going to have much smaller startup costs than something like a restaurant or a car manufacturer, where you have these really large fixed costs and you need these tangible goods to kind of actually get the business up and running. So you want to consider, when you're looking at these types of, criteria, what are reasonable startup costs for your type of business? What do you actually need to start operating? And can you include market research reports? Can you include industry reports, magazine articles that help support that you actually have spent everything necessary to get this business up and running? I also just want to note that there are some investment amounts that are just too low. We have many clients that come to us and say, I have my laptop, I have the knowledge to do the consulting, I don't need an office space, I don't need employees. I can't, I don't have anything else to spend. And we'll go over kind of common E-2 expenditures later, but I do want to, assure you that we have many clients that come to us in that position, feeling that way, and they generally are able to spend, close to 35,000, 45,000, even up to 50 or more, and then put the rest in the business bank account as working capital to get them where they need to go in terms of the investment amount. So there are ways to do it. We do generally advise that people will structure the investments they're making so they're not just spending money without reason, but perhaps they're spending money for things that maybe they would have waited until year 2 or year 3 of their business to spend money on, but they spend it now because it's better for the E-2 investor visa. All right, so I think we will now move to Dustin to talk to us about some strategies to deal with a low dollar amount.
Exactly. And Kelly, before we move on, a question did come in. We have some great questions coming in. One in particular relates to your previous slide about reciprocity, and I just wanted to quickly get your take on it. So this participant is asking, Albania, which has a 36-month reciprocity agreement, they're asking, how does it work, particularly in terms of renewing the visa? Do you mind maybe using Albania as an example and talking through that?
Sure, absolutely. So in terms of the renewal, if you're getting a 36 months visa and it's multiple entry, then every time you, basically you can travel freely internationally in and out of the United States. We usually recommend trying to renew kind of around the time your visa is expiring. So technically you could enter towards the end of that 36 months on your visa, get 2 years in E-2 status, and just stay in the US and not travel and work for 2 more years at your business. And some people might choose to do that if their business is not doing that well and they want to build up some more employees, some better tax returns, things like that before they renew. But usually we recommend that you try, if for people that are getting the visa for a period of years as opposed to a few months, we recommend that you try to renew around that 3-year mark for Albania. So maybe like 6 months ahead of time, ahead of when you wanted your visa expired, you would submit an application, to the consulate to try to renew the visa, and you can renew indefinitely in those, 3-year increments. So that's usually how it will work. If somebody has a 3-month visa and it's usually often it's single entry on the 3 months, we may say to them, okay, it makes sense to run the business for a couple of years. You have to be willing not to travel internationally, unfortunately, and then kind of go to the consulate and, renew at the time that you have good tax returns, proof of employees, and things like that. But for Albania, I'd say probably around the 3-year, about 6 months before your visa expired, you'd want to go and submit your renewal application.
Perfect. Thank you, Kelly. So we are now, as Kelly mentioned, we're switching, actually continuing with a number of the points that Kelly raised in her presentation about the E-2 requirements. And we're specifically going to talk about what strategies you can adopt if you do have a low dollar amount in terms of the investment. And again, what a low dollar amount is, the government doesn't define it, as Kelly said. We would generally consider if an applicant has an investment amount that is less than $100,000, we would certainly be looking at opportunities to bolster the application and make sure that that investment amount doesn't raise any flags. So I think the below $100,000 mark is a helpful one to think about in terms of a low investment amount. But again, as Kelly explained, it really does depend on the type of business. So if you are starting a manufacturing plant, for example, it could be that even more than $100,000 is a low investment amount. But anyway, assuming that the application does have a relatively low investment amount, one approach that we generally take with our clients who are in this situation is to really look at the application holistically. The investment amount is not the only requirement for an E-2 visa. Other requirements, as Kelly mentioned, are the requirement to show that the business is real and operating, and the requirement that the business actually employ US workers. And that second requirement, the marginality requirement that the business employ US workers, really can make or break an application in particular. So when you look at strategies, assuming that you really have spent the money that you can on the business, the next step is really to ask, are there ways that you can show in the application that the business is already employing US workers? Is it possible to hire a part-time W-2 worker, employee, for example, or even a full-time W-2 worker? And by doing that and showing in your application that even given the relatively low investment amount, you already have started employing workers, that kind of addresses, to some degree, some concern that the consular officer might have, which is, well, if they're not investing a lot of money, how are they going to employ workers? If you can already show you're doing that, that may mitigate that risk. Also, showing that the business is real and operating in spite of a low investment amount is another way to holistically kind of amplify the application, even if you do have that weakness with the investment amount. So you can show that the business is real and operating. You have some examples on your screen now through showing that you already have executed contracts with clients who want to buy your products or services. Or if you don't have executed contracts, that you already have letters from prospective clients or customers where they express their intent to engage you for your products or services. You can also get letters from local organizations like the local Chamber of Commerce that explains that this business is one that is addressing a need in this community and will likely employ workers, provide employment opportunities. You can also provide copies of your company's bank statements if it is already generating revenue. That, similar to employing workers, that shows that this is a business that, even though a lot of money is not required to get it started, it is already generating revenue with the investment amount that's already been put into the business. So on the screen, you see two examples. The first is kind of putting this into practice. So you're opening a business, the investment amount is low for that type of business. However, you've already hired 2 US employees, and the business has already started taking revenue. In the example, $80,000 a month, and you already have about 10 clients. So there you're able to show we're employing workers, we already have strong interest in the community for the products and services, and therefore, to the consular officer, the fact that we haven't invested a lot of money actually is not going to keep us from generating revenue and employing workers, as you can see. In the second example, it's riskier, certainly. So in this example, the applicant is applying for an E-2 visa. The investment amount is low. However, the applicant does not want to or cannot invest any more money and does not want to hire anyone until after the E-2 visa is approved and they have come to the US. So you can see how in this example, basically this applicant is asking the consular officer and saying, trust me. And that's a risky position to be in if you don't actually have a track record with the business. Saying to a consular officer, well, I haven't already employed anyone, I'm not already generating revenue, but trust me, I will do that in spite of a low investment amount. can be risky. And for that reason, we really do encourage our clients and all of you who are thinking about pursuing an E-2 visa, that if your investment amount is low, really do take any steps you can take to show the government that you are already generating interest in your products and services, generating revenue, if that's possible, and employing a US worker, again, if that's possible. So Kelly also talked about common E-2 visa expenditures. We have a quite detailed list on screen right now. I'm not going to go through each of these, but really, the two things that you really want to show through the investment amount. The first is that you've spent enough money to show that you're committed to the business. And granted that that's not necessarily a good business practice. If you were just starting your business and didn't need to apply for a visa, you might start generating revenue, putting as little money into the business as you can. But keep in mind, it's not a business person who's interviewing you at the consulate. It is a government officer. And really the way they think about the investment amount is, has this applicant actually committed enough of their money to convince me that they're going to take this business seriously and ultimately employ workers? So that's the first thing. You want to show that you're serious about the business through your investment amount. But the second thing, and what's relevant to this list, is that you want to show the officer that you have bought all of the items that are necessary for the business to be operational once you receive the visa to come to the US. And this is related to the real and operating requirement that Kelly talked about. You really don't want the officer to look at all of the items you've spent money on and say, well, but you've done no marketing, or, well, but you don't have an office space. Well, but there are all these other things you could have spent money on. And are you going to, when you arrive in the US, start investing in these things? Why haven't you done that beforehand? You don't want to be in that position. So instead, we always recommend that applicants really think about all of the things that you need and the business needs to be operational once the visa is issued. And you want to be able to tell the officer in your interview, sir or ma'am, once I get this visa, I'm going to fly to the US and I'm going to be able to hit the ground running and start, generating interest in the business and actually generating revenue and employing workers. So, to touch on a few of these items that I think are especially critical, and we will go back to a few of these because a few are items that you really can put more money into and see returns for the business. But very common expenses, a website, and that gets to marketing. So you do want to show that you've put money into marketing the business, that you've bought all the equipment that's necessary for the business to run. Computers are a common piece of equipment. It could be phones, inventory. If you are selling inventory, you want to show that you've spent money on that. If you have paid employees, you certainly want to put that in your investment schedule. It not only shows that you've spent money on the business, but also shows that you're employing workers, which again, can make or break an application. Obviously, there are certain things that you just need to do to establish a business. You need to create the entity. So if you've taken steps to work with, say, a lawyer to form the business entity, you'd want to include that. Legal fees for the visa can also be included. Any office supplies, licensing fees, I like to include on the list just because it does go to the real and operating component. If you are in an industry that requires that you have a certain license to practice in that industry or field, you want to show that you've actually spent money to get the license. A common example, if you're going to run a restaurant, you want to show that you have the permit from the local health department, that you actually can start serving food. You do not want to show up in your interview at the consulate and the consular officer to say, okay, so you're allowed by the local town to sell food, right? And you say, well, no, we're going to apply for that when we get there. That can be risky. If there's no option around that, if there's no alternative, then okay, you can explain, with this town, you have to physically be there to get the permit, and we have done everything we can to get as close to that as we can. But there are a few steps we do have to take when we get there. That's okay if it's required. If you can line something up like a license beforehand, it is important to do so. What are some bad expenditures? So Kelly also touched on a few of these. You are not, it's not recommended that you include expenditures related to when you come to the US and look for a business opportunity. Expenses like transportation, paying for a hotel, meals, going out with business associates. These are things that consulates generally consider weak. And as Kelly mentioned, it's not simply that they're weak, it's also that they could invite scrutiny by the consular officer. It could cause them to take a closer look at your investment schedule as a whole. And I should say, I use the expression investment schedule. When you submit your application, what we prepare for our clients, and we do generally recommend to others, is that you actually create a spreadsheet that lists each and every expense that you have paid for related to the business, excluding weak expenses like the ones you see on your screen, but otherwise, all of those expenses that are necessary for the business: inventory, equipment, marketing, legal fees, professional fees. List them all out on a spreadsheet with a reference to where the officer can turn in a PDF and actually see the invoice and see the bank account where it shows that the funds were actually withdrawn from your bank account. And that's what the officer will expect to see and will hope that they see in an organized way when you're actually applying for the visa and at your interview. So what are some common challenges for real estate investments? I will switch it over to Kelly to touch on this one.
Perfect. I think this is our consulting businesses slide.
Oh, I'm so
And we'll
sorry,
talk
Kelly.
about
That's my fault. That's my fault.
no,
I thought consulting was after real estate, and I was looking at the follow-up slide. That is entirely my fault. Okay, so with consulting businesses, we're going to put into practice some of the items that I mentioned about before. Kelly is going to talk about real estate investments on the next slide, which I see on my screen, but you all do not see. So the reason we focus on consulting businesses is that they tend to have low overhead. It's usually not expensive to start a consulting business. And I should also say, like I mentioned during the introduction, that our firm was started on an E-2 business, and law firms tend also not to have large overhead expenses. So our founder has personally navigated this process, and that does inform the way that we guide our clients on these issues. So with consulting firms, even though it doesn't take a lot of money to start a consulting firm, there are certainly ways that you can show the officer that A, you are committed to the business, and B, that you have spent money on all of the things that are necessary for the business to be operational. And what I like to do is try to put myself in the consular officer's shoes, and I encourage all of you to do the same. And maybe instead of putting yourself in the consular officer's shoes, imagine that you're sharing with a close friend or family member your plan to start a business in the United States. And you go to them and you say to them, I'm planning to start a business in the US. And they're curious. Well, are you serious about this, or is this just an idea of yours? And what are the questions they would ask to get a sense of how serious you are about this? Well, they'd want to know, have you actually taken steps to commit yourself to this? Have you paid for an office space? Have you actually bought the things that you need to run the business? So keep that in mind, that the consular officer is going to be asking questions about your investment to assess, have you really thought about all the things that you can buy to show that you're A, ready to get the business running once you arrive, and B, that you're actually committed to this business. Some areas where you generally can invest even more money into, if you find that you think you've bought everything you need for the business to be operational, and you really are thinking, I'm only at, say, $50,000, I want to find ways to increase that amount. Some of the things you can consider are an office space, for example. Even if you already have an office space, many facilities will let you pay for rent in advance. So if it's possible to prepay, say, 6 months or even a year of office space, you can pay that in a lump sum to the facility, to the landlord, and you can list that on your investment schedule that you have paid rent for say 6 months or 12 months in advance, and you can include that in your investment amount. On the topic of office space, I do want to quickly say a lot of people, a very common question is, can I use a co-working space? The answer is yes, but we do recommend that if you're using a co-working space like a WeWork, for example, that you actually get at least a dedicated desk. WeWork tends to offer options where you basically get access to the building, but you don't have a committed desk. So you basically go in and you find an open space that day and you work there. We don't generally recommend that. So we do recommend that at a minimum, get a dedicated desk so that you can you actually have that dedicated space that you'll go to any given day that you show up to the office. And in your application, you'll take photos of that space and include that in the application to show the officer that not only do you have a signed lease, but you also have photos to show that this is a real space. You know, if you can, put up signs advertising your business with the name of your business in that office space. And those things are persuasive to an officer. The second item you see on the list is equipment. So if there are opportunities to buy more equipment, let's say, you know, for the first few months, you plan to be working alone and you plan to hire someone, say in month 6 or maybe year 2, maybe buy the computer that they will be using at the start. Even though no one will be using it for 6 months, you can buy that equipment anticipating that an employee will be using it. Invest in marketing. I really like to focus on marketing because odds are you can invest more in marketing and see returns for the business. So, you know, I try never to recommend that clients spend money simply for the sake of spending money. I always try to find opportunities for them to spend money on things that actually will give a return to them and their business. And I think marketing is a good one. If you are already advertising on Facebook, maybe increase the number of ads. Same with Google ads. If you have a website, is it possible to make the website more user-friendly, more attractive? You know, oftentimes there are opportunities to put more money into these areas and see returns for the business. And finally, you see on your screen, hire employees. I know I've said it already a few times. I know Kelly said it, but really hiring employees is key. And if you can do it before you submit your application, do it. It really can make an application much stronger. And as you see here, it can be an opportunity to bolster the investment amount. So think creatively about, you know, are there ways, even if the business right now is slow, maybe the business could accommodate a part-time administrator who will work on bookkeeping, say. Maybe, you know, maybe you want to hire someone to actually help with your marketing part-time instead of, you know, you developing the website. Maybe you want to contract someone to actually either as an independent contractor or a part-time employee to do your marketing for you. So think creatively about what you can do in those areas. And with that, I will switch it over to Kelly to talk about real estate companies.
Thank you, Dustin. Perfect. So, you know, real estate has some specific challenges for E2s, you know, partly because I think it's very common that we have clients call us and say, I own a property. It's just a home that I own or a residence that I own in the United States, like can that be my E2 investment? And it cannot, you know, because of all of the elements that we've talked about previously, you know, particularly real and operating, but just the E2 enterprise needs to be an ongoing concern that's taking in revenue, that's hiring, you know, employees, that's actually, you know, producing a, you know, a good or a service. So merely kind of owning a property and putting it in the name, you know, of an LLC, you know, is not going to qualify for the E2 visa. And so that's, you know, kind of, I think, one thing that whenever they see a real estate company, they're always kind of quite attuned to that, which is somebody just purchasing a property, or are they just doing kind of house flipping on a very small scale and they want to get an E2 for that? I think, you know, that extra scrutiny, really means that you want to go above and beyond if you have a real estate application to make sure that it's clear that it really is a real and operating active company and not just passive real estate ownership. So you also want to make sure that you have proper licensing. So it's very common, and this is kind of very state specific within the United States, that for the types of businesses that we've listed here as kind of good E-2 real estate businesses, so a brokerage firm, renovation, construction, house flipping if it's on a large scale, very often you do need licenses. You need a real estate license. There needs to be some type of brokerage, license, or perhaps you need a license to do renovations in a particular county. And they can be quite sensitive to that, either at the consulates or in U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services in the United States. So that means that when you're doing these types of businesses, you want to make sure that you've gotten that work done ahead of time. Either research to say, okay, yes, I need. Sometimes you need a social security number to get a certain license. You want to kind of speak with a licensing board to figure out what is the pathway, how long will it take to get the license. Sometimes we have clients who partner with a particular, U.S. citizen or business partner who already has that license. Perhaps they have a minority ownership in the company, or they own it 50-50, which works for E-2, and then they can rely on that license. But the point is that you need to have a plan for how you're going to deal with the licensing issues, for real estate companies. And then you also just want to make sure that, you're making sure that it's an active enterprise, one that will support, hiring U.S. workers. The ones we've listed here, we've gotten approvals for all of these types of businesses. For house flipping, if it's on a very large scale, a client comes to mind who, had purchased 40 homes and was renovating those and selling them. And, that type of activity is significant enough that it could be an active enterprise. So another area, that comes up a lot is, and is also, kind of risky in the same way that real estate businesses are risky, are these equity trading companies. So similar to how putting a property in an LLC is not active enough, just taking your stock portfolio and putting it into an LLC is not going to qualify. Additionally, you want to kind of be going beyond just your friends and family. If you do have some friends and their portfolios are active enough, that may be a good place to start, but you want to make sure that your business plan makes it clear that you will be pursuing clientele beyond just, that small pool of initial clients that you may have. And then additionally, similar to the real estate, you want to make sure that you have your proper licenses, because this is another highly regulated industry, and something where if you don't need a license for whatever particular thing you're doing, you need to be able to show that. I'm going to explain that to the government. So that's something you want to investigate, before you submit your application. So now we will go to, just some reasons for E-2 denials. One thing can be low investment amount, as Dustin has mentioned in a previous slide. When you have a low investment amount, you really want to think holistically about how you can make other aspects of your case stronger. But there are times when the investment amount is just too low. A client comes to mind who had spent $2,000 and put $98,000 in a business bank account. That just was never going to be considered substantial because only $2,000 was irrevocably committed and at risk. And it's just not going to be considered sufficient for the E-2 investor visa. So, sometimes your investment amount is just too low. I think that over the years at certain very friendly consulates and with USCIS, who are very friendly to lower investment amounts, we've gone as low as maybe, $15,000 spent. And maybe 35,000 or a little bit more in a business bank account. I'd say as the years have gone on, we've really kind of pushed that up because we've seen pushes from the consulates to really push that up. So, you want to just as much as possible, you want to, try to get your investment amount closer to 100,000 if you can, even if you have a service-based business. Not to say you can't do it with a lower amount closer to 50, but it's just going to be riskier. Other reasons that come up are the nature of the business. So the ones we just talked about, consulting companies, real estate, equity trading, those are all possible for E-2, but riskier, and something that certain consulates are just going to be unhappy with. So you want to kind of consider that when you're thinking about what type of business to pursue, if you have options, you may want to stay away from kind of one of the riskier types of businesses. Other things that can come up for E-2 denials are just filing location and venue. Unfortunately, sometimes there are just consulates that are not E-2 friendly, or they're the type of consulates where they get a lot of E-2 companies, so very large institutional company investors who are spending millions of dollars. Those types of, sometimes you see that kind of at the consulates in Asia. Sometimes it can be harder to have these like under $100,000 investment amounts at those types of consulates because they really are just so used to seeing these very large investments from companies, and they're not as friendly to these lower investment amounts. So to the extent that you have the option for different venues, that's something you want to talk about with your attorney to see what, if perhaps you could go to a friendlier venue or maybe change status in the United States and build up your investment and then go to a consulate. Another thing that can happen is if you've been running a company for many, many years in your home country and you never hired employees, that can make it harder for the consulate to believe that you're actually going to hire employees in the US. A good way to combat that is actually to hire an employee before you apply. So you can see that you've already kind of met that criteria. Similar, going along with that, concern over whether the business will create jobs for US workers. Here's where a 5-year business plan with really solid 5-year personnel plan, 5-year financials that make sense is going to be really, really key. And again, you always have the option as well to actually hire a worker before you submit your application, and that can be very helpful. Something else that can happen are issues with the adjudicating officer. Most of the time our clients have either neutral or polite, good experiences, but there are, every now and then they do encounter an officer who's very aggressive or takes an aggressive stance, or perhaps doesn't really understand the regulations. Unfortunately, the officers do have complete discretion over whether to grant the visa. That being said, if they deny you, we always recommend that you ask what was the reason for the denial. There's nothing that stops you from reapplying, and most consulates will try to give you a different officer the next time. It's not a guarantee, but as a policy matter, they generally try to do that. And then the other is if you didn't meet the requirements at the time of filing. So, perhaps you filed with the wrong passport, so you don't prove you're a treaty country national, or, going back to the example of someone who spent $2,000, you just didn't meet the requirements when you actually filed the application. So that's another thing that can come up for denials. And I'll turn it back to Dustin to talk about some adjudication trends and complex issues.
Yes, and Kelly, before we dive into that, there were a couple questions that came in earlier that I think are relevant to this E-2 denial slide. One question is, if the visa is denied, what happens to the business? So I guess I'm not sure exactly of the context here, but I don't know if you want to talk about how people navigate a visa denial, and if they have the business in the US. You mentioned applying again, and maybe it'd be helpful to talk through what options people have if they are facing a denial.
Sure. So if you're denied, and I wasn't sure about this question, talking about selling the business again, if you bought a business. So in terms of denials, if you did buy a business and you put your money into escrow and you had that escrow arrangement, the benefit to you is that, the condition wasn't met, your E-2 wasn't granted, therefore the money could go back to you. So if in an escrow arrangement, a denial has the option to be kind of the least impactful because you have that ability to get your money back. Obviously, you're not able to purchase the business, so that's a negative impact, but you're not also losing that money. If your visa is denied and you invested into the business, you kind of have a couple options. One is you could try to recoup whatever, like if you bought equipment you didn't need, you could try to return those things. You could try to recoup whatever your investment is and kind of move away from it. You also have the opportunity to look at what they were unhappy with, with the application and try to, go back and reapply. So for example, if they thought the investment amount was too low, if you have more to invest, you could invest more. Like let's say you had 80,000, you spent 25, and the rest was your working capital. You always have that option to go back and spend some of that working capital. Another thing you can do is have a CPA come and investigate analyze your business plan and look at your investment schedule and write a letter explaining that, based on their work with similar types of businesses, this seems to be, substantial to set up this type of business. So there's ways that you can try to strategize to reapply And, like it'll just kind of depend on what the officers were unhappy with. When there's anything connected to kind of fraud or more subjective factors that they don't, believe you, it's going to be harder to overcome. When it's more objective, such as, well, we think it's marginal, there's no employees, you could potentially hire an employee. Or if it's a really low investment amount and you have more working capital, you can always invest a little bit more. So those are kind of ways that you can, mitigate some of the damage from a denial.
Perfect. Thank you, Kelly. Okay, as Kelly mentioned, I am going to shift gears a little bit and talk about E-2 adjudication trends and hot topics, and then we'll get into some complex areas. So adjudication trends, the Biden administration and the E-2 visa. First question, will the approval rate change? So this question is becoming a little bit outdated. I think there are two things to note. First is, fortunately, E-2 visas tend to be supported by both parties, because the idea is that foreign entrepreneurs or business owners are going to generate jobs for US workers. The E-2 visa does tend to not draw a lot of negative feelings from either side. And so as a result, we actually saw consistency in terms of approval rates between the Trump administration and the Biden administration. And I would say that we've not noticed a significant change there. I think no real surprises that applications tend to be approved as we expect they would. Now, the second item, will E-2 visas be adjudicated faster? This was something that I think many practitioners we're hoping we would see after the Biden administration came into office. And unfortunately, the delays that really grew under the prior administration and then were just amplified through COVID have not significantly declined. There was a period about a year ago when things seemed to be getting a little bit faster, but for whatever reason, we are still seeing extensive delays at consulates around the world. Now, that being said, one of the important roles that we do play with our clients is looking at what options they might have available to them if they can apply in more than one consulate or in an alternative consulate, depending on their nationality or residency. Then we work with clients to figure out what the quickest route would likely be. But frankly, right now, I keep in my mind the 4 to 5 month mark as kind of an average, where some consulates are taking much longer than that and others are moving faster than that. But right now, unfortunately, there are still extensive delays. What happened to BAHA, Buy American, Hire American? This was an initiative under the prior administration to really kind of restrict immigration options based on, in some ways, the idea that U.S. citizens and those and permanent residents should be hired, and those from abroad, foreign nationals, should not be given opportunities that are not available to those within the U.S. So basically, BAHA has largely been done away with. However, if you are applying for, say, an E-2 employee visa, it is important still to make it clear that the company has taken steps to try to hire domestic workers before they are applying for a visa for a foreign national to come in and work for the company. Are consulates currently processing E-2 visa petitions? Yes, they are by and large. There are still some consulates that are essentially shut down when it comes to E-2 visas, E-2 visa processing. Again, we work with clients to discuss what those are and navigate that process if the client is trying to apply at one of those consulates. But most consulates are processing E-2 visas. Timelines, as I mentioned, are delayed, but there is variation. And I should also say that timelines change. If a new variant is announced, for example, Omicron really slowed things down after they had become quicker. So a new variant can really slow things down. even world global events such as Afghanistan and what's happening in Ukraine, that draws staff from other consulates. Staff could be drawn from, say, Frankfurt, Germany, to work on the crisis in Ukraine, to potentially go to, say, Poland to process applicants there. So you do see how staffing stresses are related to global events, and those things can cause things to slow down or to move quicker. Now, something that's become much more common with COVID in particular is that many people are considering applying through USCIS, where in the past they would apply through a consulate. USCIS is an option to extend your status if you're physically within the US. You can't apply through USCIS if you're outside the US. If you're in the US and you are on an E-2 visa or really any visa, you can change your status or extend your E-2 status. Now, USCIS has its pros and cons. The pro of applying at USCIS, there are a few. One is that you can opt for premium processing. So you can get a decision in 2 weeks from the government, a response, I should say, because the response could be a request for additional evidence. That is guaranteed in 2 weeks from the date of application. You do have to pay for a premium processing fee, but consulates do not offer that expedited option. Another benefit of applying with USCIS is that they tend to be less strict when it comes to the overall investment amount. So something that I didn't touch on before is if you are starting a business with a low investment amount and you are inside the US, it could be a good idea to apply through USCIS. If nothing else, because they tend not to focus as much on the overall investment amount. The flip side of that is that USCIS very closely scrutinizes where you got the money from that you invested into the business. So you want to make sure you have very clear documentation that shows that you got the funds invested in the business from a legitimate and lawful source. Consulates tend not to focus on that as much. So you start to see how, depending on the strengths and weaknesses of your situation, your circumstances, USCIS could be a good option versus a consulate, or vice versa. And just to bring it back to the trends, USCIS, if travel outside the US becomes more difficult, USCIS is going to become a more common option. And we do see people very frequently applying at USCIS. You can apply simultaneously at USCIS and a consulate. So if you're in the US, and you want to change status to E2 and get the business going as soon as you can, you might apply premium processing through USCIS and at the same time file an application with a consulate, so that when that consulate gets around to your application in 4 months, 9 months, whenever it is, you will have been in the US operating the E2 business domestically through your change of status through USCIS. That is generally an option. Some issues and complex areas that come up with E2 visas. Kelly and I have talked about several of these. Do I have to hire employees before I apply? You do not have to hire employees before you apply for an E2 visa. However, again, it can make or break an application. If you have weaknesses in other areas, we would generally recommend that you think about whether you can hire. You can afford to hire a worker before you apply, and it really can strengthen the application. If you are starting a business, you certainly at a minimum want to have a strong business plan that shows that based on firm, good, reliable financial assumptions, you will be employing US workers within 5 years of operations. Complicated source and trail of funds. As I said on the prior slide, USCIS really takes a close look at where you got the money from. Loans are generally a fine source of funds. However, the loan cannot be secured by the assets of the E2 business, but a loan from a bank, loan that's based on your home, your personal property, generally fine. Even a loan from a family member or a friend, generally fine. Gifts are also acceptable. You can really receive a gift from anyone. The issue with gifts, to keep in mind, is that you do need to provide to the government where the person who gave you the gift got the money. So if this is say a sibling, say your brother or sister wants to give you $100,000 to start your business, and they got that money from working over the last 3 years, you would need to provide in your application proof, whether through pay stubs, tax returns, proof of where your sibling got those funds before they gifted them to you. Again, to show the government that the funds were lawfully acquired by them. E-2 visas for 2 investors, this is possible. The 2 investors must own 50% each, because to qualify as an E-2 investor, your ownership cannot drop below 50%. So if you have 2 investors, 50% ownership, equal ownership is the only option if both are applying for E-2 visas. If both individuals are not applying for E-2 investors, then really as long as you own over 50% or more, you qualify based on the ownership requirement. And your co-investor, if they're not pursuing an E-2 visa, really can be anyone. They don't need to have E-2 treaty nationality. They can be a US citizen. They can be a green card holder. Again, assuming they're not pursuing an E-2 visa themselves. Green card holders and US citizens cannot apply for an E-2 visa. Substantive changes to E-2 businesses after filing. This can be really a gray area. However, and particularly in terms of the type of business, there are certain changes to the business that are more aligned with the business type. So for example, if your E-2 visa is to run a restaurant and you decide to open a coffee shop, there may be an argument there that this is not a substantial change that you need to notify the government of. I would recommend that even still you speak with an attorney to make sure that you are erring on the side of caution. But there are other examples that are clearly distinct. So if you run a restaurant and you want to start a consulting business that you're advising on, networks, to connect computers for businesses, that is clearly a different type of business, and you very likely should let the government know that your business has changed. Changes in ownership. It is okay to change ownership as long as the E-2 investors' ownership percentage remains at least 50%. You want to make absolutely sure that your ownership stake never drops below 50%. The moment it does, you become ineligible for the E-2 investor visa. Family business purchases. Kelly touched on this earlier. You want to be careful if you are purchasing the business from family, or really purchasing any significant asset for the business from family. You want to show that you are paying the fair market value, that you are not getting some artificial value based on your close relationship to the person. And also it's important to show that the funds were actually committed to the business. The government will scrutinize if you are buying a business from a family member. The government wants to make sure that you're not getting that money back, that money really is money that you're committing to the business, again, to show that you yourself are committed to the business. So if you're buying a family business, it could be particularly important to get a CPA letter, for example, that states that this is the fair market value that's paid for the business. So Kelly, why don't we have a few questions, and I know I ran a bit over, but I think we can get through a few of these. I don't know if you've taken a look, some new ones have come in. If there are any you noticed that you wanted to run through in particular.
So, I mean, I think we could just run down the list. Some of the more detailed ones, will kind of give brief answers, but may need to set up a consult if you want to go over the specifics. But the first couple I can take quickly. How many earnings do you have to have in a year, and how many employees? There is no particular number that you need to meet, but it needs to be high enough that it could support reasonably you as the investor, and ideally a few employees. We generally recommend for employees that you show you have at least 3 to 4 full-time employees by year 5 of operations. Who is working in a business? If you buy a gas station, I think that, I'm not really sure what that question is. Like, if you buy a gas station, people that would work there would be, managers, gas station attendants, things like that, who can manage the business until you get the visa. That's something you kind of need to work out. If you're buying a business, often you can work something out with the seller, where there's some period of transition time. Perhaps during the closing period, they agree to, stay on for a few months. And so sometimes if you have an escrow arrangement, you can do, and you have a good relationship with the seller, you can kind of do things like that when you are doing that type of situation. Justin, were there any that you wanted to cover?
Sure. So I assume all receipts must be kept in terms of purchases. I have a few things I bought a few years ago, such as a laptop and phone. Can I count them? Great question. The answer is you do need to keep receipts for expenditures that you spent on the E-2 business. The answer to that is yes. Things that you bought in the past, really for me, it comes down to two things. First of all, is the source of funds. So if you are saying that you got a gift from a sibling of $100,000 and that's the source of the money that you've put into the business, things that you bought before that date could not be included in that source of funds. So that's the first thing, is the timing needs to work in terms of the source of funds and spending the money. The second thing I would say is if these are things that you actually did buy for the purpose of the business, you just bought them a few years ago, I would err on the side of saying, yeah, yes, you can include them. I would advise caution though, if they are things that, you bought a laptop, you used it for yourself a couple years, and now you want to use it for the business, I would not include that. I think it risks raising more questions than it answers. So you kind of have to use your judgment there. But really, if you are buying something that really is for the purpose of the business, even though if it was bought a little while back, it can be included. Let's see, is it possible to start an additional business to the one for which the E-2 visa was granted? The answer is it depends. You really do want the scope of your E-2 visa. The scope of the E-2 investor only has work authorization to work for the E-2 business. And you define the scope of that business when you submit the application to the government. So going back to our restaurant example, if you are starting a restaurant and you tell the government, I'm going to start a restaurant, I need an E-2 visa to start the restaurant, that's the only thing you should be doing. You do not have work authorization to start, let's take this example here, a micro SaaS company, a software company. That's not within the scope. However, if your E-2 visa application said, I'm going to start, I'm going to operate an LLC, and within that umbrella, I'm going to both run a restaurant and a software company, and the government approves that, then your work authorization is technically to do both of those things. And so you can include that within the scope. The important thing is to be transparent with the government and not to work outside of the authorization that you have. This is a gray area, as I mentioned. Kelly, I'm curious if you have more thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I think, I think you covered it, correctly. I think, a key is just really like, what did you submit to the government when you got your initial E-2 visa? And then as well, what you don't want to do is either dissolve the E-2 entity, the LLC that you got for your E-2 business and start a new one, even if it has the same name, or start a completely different line of business, or purchase a separate business and start working directly for that business. Like you want to, those things are not permitted. And if you're contemplating any major changes to your service offerings or purchasing or acquiring a new business, you want to speak to your immigration attorney first. There's certain things you can do to try to make parts of that workable, but most of that requires kind of going back to the consulate and getting an approval first, or potentially just, talking to your attorney about how you're going to structure any work you do for any new LLCs you acquire. So the point is you really want to talk to your attorneys before you make any of those changes to make sure that you're not going to put yourself in a situation where you're accidentally working unauthorized.
Perfect. And so let's see, Rick from Berlin. Hi, Rick. I bought the assets of a restaurant in Boston that was closed. You've now finished the restaurant, spent 80% of the capital, all permits are ready to go. Can I send the application to USCIS or Frankfurt? That would really depend on your circumstances and if you're in the US. USCIS is an option if you're in the US. Should I first wait to open, work some months and send the application? Well, I think there are a couple things here. First of all, if you're in the US, you want to be very careful that you're not working without authorization. So don't work without authorization. If you're here already, that really could stay with you for future visa applications. So that's the first thing. The second thing, though, is it's not necessary to wait until the business has actually been operating to apply for the visa. So really, I think that would come down to the specific circumstances in your case and what works best for you. And maybe a consultation is the best place to talk through that. But you can certainly apply for an E-2 visa based on a business plan that has projections and forecasts, rather than showing that the business is actually already running. Let's see. I know Rick also asked for the source of funds. I sold my house abroad to my brother, who's an American citizen, and all the transactions were done with a bank in the US. I'm not seeing any red flags here, as long as the transactions were legitimate, as long as you have documentation showing the transfer of funds into your bank account, and also the funds leaving your bank account showing that you've spent them on the business. Selling personal property is a very common source, and I know the family issue is the flag there, but as long as you have good documentation and it was a legitimate transfer, I don't think it should be a problem. Kelly, do you see any issues with that?
Yeah, I don't see any. I think you would want to have a purchase sale agreement, and the value of the property should be appropriate, based on kind of what the documents show. So you would just want to make sure that that was clear. But the fact you've sold it to a relative is fine, as long as the amount is really a fair market value for the property and you've gotten the money.
Perfect.
I see this last, someone is in Canadian national, currently in Montreal, is going to apply in Toronto, is investing in a business that needs a license. So can you apply before you get your license? And then you'll have it at the time of the interview. I think, yes, it is possible. You might even, in the application, possibly reference that you've already submitted you would want to have it pending and really have assurance that you're going to get that license. Because if for some reason you didn't have it at the time of the interview, that could be very detrimental. But as long as you had, full confidence that you were going to make it through the licensing process, given the way that the processing times are happening in Toronto right now, people are getting, you're submitting your application, people are getting able to schedule their interview within a few weeks, but then the interviews that are available are kind of in summer of 2023. Some people are able to get earlier appointments by logging on each day multiple times a day after they get that initial appointment. But given how long it's taking, yes, I think it's fine to submit before you get that approval, as long as you know you're going to have it at the time of your interview.
Perfect.
All right.
So I think we made it through all the questions. We did run a
Yes.
little over. Kelly, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and being with us today. And thank you all to the participants who watched. We will be following up with a few links. One is to our YouTube channel, where we upload all of these webinars, as well as shorter videos on a range of topics. And we will share a link to future webinars. So we hope to see you all on those. And Kelly, thank you again.
Thank you.
We hope to see you all soon.